The Albanese government today released the report it commissioned from health experts into Australia's response to the COVID epidemic. Oh my. This was far too gentle about a response that should shame this country. Our leaders overreacted, they spread fear, they smashed Australians with tough bans and massive overspending, and too many Australians just took it and are now paying for it. Now, all this should have been obvious at the time. God knows, I try to warn about this time after time. Now, sure, this report now admits, yes, we did overreacted. Yeah, absolutely. It says a number of the more contentious measures, such as enforced quarantine, curfews, and closing outdoor playgrounds, were not supported by pre-existing evidence. It says the government should have checked with the experts, but they did. That's the problem. They checked with their preferred experts, the ones who were saying, well, close the playgrounds, chase people out of the parks and the beaches, lock them in their homes, even though, as I said at the time, the overwhelming evidence was that COVID was almost never spread outdoors. Now, this report says many other measures were also not scientific, did a lot of damage, closing the borders without compassion, closing the schools. Again, where was the science in that? Almost no child died from this virus. I said it at the time. I'm no expert, but the experts, and so as a result, children in Melbourne, for instance, lost nearly a year of direct schooling. Now, this report should have named and shamed these politicians and experts responsible for this disaster. It didn't. Instead, we've seen people like Victoria's Chief Medical Officer get an Order of Australia, thank you very much. His boss, Premier Daniel Andrews, getting a statue to himself. See, I think this is in part because the Albanese government tried to neuter this report. It said the experts shouldn't look at the unilateral actions of the states. No, don't look at them, though they were the worst offenders. In fact, the Treasurer today exploited the release of this report to find one more excuse for the high inflation under his watch. The Morrison government said, spent far too much on this stimulus to keep the economy going during the pandemic.
Big decisions were taken and big mistakes were made. Those mistakes were costly and they were inflationary. The extended policy support, which didn't always move in line with the health advice, meant that peak inflation was at least 2 percentage points higher than it could have been.
Jim Chalmers, you are a hypocrite. It's true the Morrison government spent too much, but Labor, Jim Chalmers, wanted it to spend even more. Here is Chalmers, who was then in the opposition, near the end of the pandemic, demanding the government drop its plans to wind back the expensive JobKeeper spending.
They're in too big a rush to withdraw support from the economy while unemployment is still rising. The rate and eligibility of JobKeeper is entirely the preserve of the Treasurer. He gets to set the rates and the eligibility. We urge him to reconsider winding that back because the economy is still in all sorts of trouble.
And that wasn't all. Labor wanted to pay people to get vaccinated. That would have cost another $6 billion. All these other schemes that all up would have meant that Labor spent $81 billion more than even the Morrison government. So bottom line, our politicians and most of the health bureaucracy went mad during the pandemic, and so did Labor. They went all authoritarian. As this report said, human rights went out the window. Victoria's police, would you believe, even handcuffed a pregnant mother in front of her children at home for posting on the internet a protest at the restrictions that this report now admits were too tough. The report says, how dare, people's trust in the authorities has been broken. But until some people lose their jobs for what they did to us, I don't see that changing at all. Joining me is my Tuesday regular, National Senator Matt Canavan, the former Resources Minister. Matt Canavan, good to see you, but this report, your response?
Look, I think you've summed it up very, very well, Andrew. People have had their trust destroyed in institutions that lied to them, exaggerated the pandemic, and then ultimately, as you've outlined, locked them up in their own homes, kept their kids going from school, stopped them from seeing loved ones, even if those loved ones were on their deathbed. So many people were harmed by the decisions made during the pandemic, yet the people who made those decisions, who made those mistakes, have have received almost zero accountability. Now, I haven't been able to read all of this report today, but I welcome its at least admission of those failures. It's an admission, though, that it had to make under enormous constraints imposed on the review by the Prime Minister. He told them they couldn't look into the specific decisions of the state governments. He exempted them from this review. They've held no public hearings of any kind. I mean, how can we restore trust in our society until those people who made those decisions come in and under oath tell us all what the hell happened? How did this happen? Why did it happen? And how do we make sure it never happens again? As admirable as the findings of this review are, I don't think we've got closure yet until we have a proper Royal Commission into the COVID pandemic. We had one 100 years ago after the Spanish flu. We have ones almost every time there's a policy issue now. We have a Royal Commission. But the time when the governments have spent the most money, imposed the most draconian controls on you, they've refused to have a Royal Commission into themselves. That's not going to do nothing to restore trust. We badly need to restore trust in our public institutions, but I don't think it will happen until there is accountability.
Yeah, and let's not also forget that this is a wider cultural problem. I had my faith in this country shocked that Australians so readily embrace the fear and the restrictions that we're now all paying for with high inflation and low productivity, et cetera, plus, of course, a lot of children missing out on crucial education and socialisation. Matt Canavan, I mentioned at the top of the show this new Future Fund boss, Greg Combet, saying he wants to invest more of our money in the Future Fund to cut emissions and get to net zero. Is that his job?
Well, I wish it wasn't. I think he's going to get away with it under this government because they're effectively here using your piggy bank to pursue their own political pet projects. This is your money. It's not theirs. It's not Greg Combet's money. It's not Anthony Albanese's money. It is the money of the Australian taxpayers. And if it is misspent and lost and squandered, then we'll all have to pay more in the future to pay for these unfunded public sector liabilities, which remain unfunded. The Future Fund does not cover all of them, despite the admirable work of Peter Costello. And Peter Costello, he clearly ran the fund to make sure it offered a return. And I think when we invest our money in our own superannuation funds or invest them in a managed investment trust, what we want our managers to do is to make a return for us, to spend our money wisely and put that money to work. What's happening here is because the government is out of money and its renewable energy projects aren't attracting the investment it thought they would, it's going to go and raid. It's going to go smash this piggy bank and fund like the offshore wind projects that are falling over before our eyes, the hydrogen projects, which even Twiggy Forrest is walking away from. Why would we throw such good money after bad and invest in projects the private sector doesn't want to touch with a barge pole?
I think this is so dangerous. Stick to your knitting, Greg Combet. Just make money to fund future liabilities and let saving the planet up to the government.